I've watched mountains rise where oceans used to be. I've seen continents drift apart until entire oceans were born. But nothing compares to what happened 252 million years ago. There were no dinosaurs. The world belonged to creatures you've probably never heard of. I remember thinking nature had finally figured everything out. I couldn't have been more wrong. I watched almost everything I knew disappear. The rivers fell silent. The forests died. Even the oceans became graveyards. This is the story of the Permian and how I survived the day the Earth nearly died. When I first arrived, Earth looked very different. There was no Atlantic Ocean, just one enormous supercontinent called Pangaea. The interior was brutally hot and dry. I crossed deserts that seemed to stretch forever. Sometimes months passed without a single drop of rain, and yet life thrived. The forests buzzed with strange insects and towering ancient plants. The land belonged to the synapsids, the distant relatives of mammals. I spent years walking beside Dimetrodon. Despite the sail on its back, it wasn't a dinosaur. In fact, it was more closely related to you than to any dinosaur that would come later. At sunrise, I watched sail-backed predators warm themselves beside quiet rivers. Massive herbivores wandered through the forest, feeding without urgency. Small, burrowing animals disappeared underground whenever storms approached. It all felt permanent. That was my mistake. The first warning came from the north. The ground split open. At first, almost nothing changed, but the eruptions never stopped. They continued for hundreds of thousands of years. Lava buried landscapes on a scale almost impossible to imagine. But the lava wasn't what killed the world. The sky was. Ash and volcanic gases filled the atmosphere until breathing itself became difficult. The planet grew hotter. The rain stopped. The rivers I once followed simply vanished. The oceans changed in ways few creatures could survive. Ancient reefs collapsed, taking entire ecosystems with them. The forests slowly turned gray. The great herds grew smaller every year. Then one morning, there was nothing. This wasn't survival of the fittest. It was a world that had forgotten how to stay alive. Afterward, the planet became unbelievably quiet. For millions of years, recovery came one small step at a time. Life always finds an opening. Small reptiles inherited the empty world left behind. From them would come crocodiles, pterosaurs, and eventually dinosaurs. And hidden in small burrows were tiny relatives of your own ancestors. The greatest extinction in Earth's history wasn't caused by an asteroid. Every bird, every mammal, and every person alive today carries the legacy of what happened here. I was there when the world nearly died, and I was there when it learned to live again. The world didn't end that day. It just became quiet. For millions of years, I wandered across a planet that was almost empty. There were no great herds, no endless forests, only silence and time. Then, very slowly, life returned. Not with giants, not with kings. The creatures that survived weren't the strongest. They weren't the biggest. Most of them were so small, I almost walked right past them. I had no idea. I was looking at the future. Because one day, their descendants would become the rulers of this planet. And much later, one of them would become you. I've learned something after all this time. The end of one world is often the beginning of another. The Great Dying. I watched the world grow quiet. Then, little by little, it lived again. But this wasn't where my story began. If we're going to keep walking together, we should start where every story starts. At the beginning.